This is a lesson in when we all work together, no matter how difficult the divisions that push us apart, we can achieve extraordinary things. I think this film, this story, shows that. And that's a very inspiring message in a world which is so divided.
Hello everyone and welcome to the CaracolTV.com social media. Here I am with Orlando von Isidel. Welcome.
Great, good. You said my name correctly. Well done, fantastic.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here and to be able to talk about this documentary, The Last Children. That of course it tells the story about the 4 children, the Mukutui brothers, who got lost in the jungle. And I would like to start by asking you, how was your first connection with this story and what made you feel like it was important to be told in a documentary?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me to talk about this. Like tens of millions of people around the world, I learned about this story on the news. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I was gripped. And normally these stories end very sadly, but the fact that this didn't was extraordinary. I think what really interested me, it's about resilience and empathy and the strength of the human spirit, but the story behind the search and rescue operation, a story about 2 groups of people, the indigenous volunteers and the Colombian military, who historically have mistrust between them. They don't necessarily like each other, they've got lots of misconceptions, and the fact that they came together to work for a shared goal, I thought that was extraordinary. And the world is very polarized and divided, and here's a story of unity, and that's, for me, was very inspiring.
Okay, I saw this documentary with a bunch of people that I work with, and at the end we were like overwhelmed, and we were wondering how much time did it take to make this reality and to make it real. I mean, collecting the testimonies, talking with the people, seeing the real footage, because of course it's a documentary and you guys have real footage of what happened in the jungle. How many time did it take to make this real?
So films like this, to do them right and appropriately, they take a lot of time. So I'm British. I'm not an expert about Colombia, and I think whenever you make a film about an experience outside of your own socio-economic understandings, there's a lot of responsibility. And so key to that is working with people who understand local realities. And I was very lucky to partner with Jorge Duran, who's a Colombian film director, and Lali Houghton, who's a British-Peruvian film director, to build this great team so that we could tell the story right and appropriately, and in a way that wasn't really extractive. I think overall we started making this soon after the children were rescued, and when are we now? We're in November, so it's been a long year and a half, but to do it slowly feels always the way to do it correctly. And you've got to build trust with all of the people in it. You can't just turn up, meet them, say hello, let's do an interview. To get people to be honest and emotionally vulnerable, that takes time.
Okay, that leads me to another question. I know you studied anthropology in a film, right? But of course you have a lot of experience. You've also won an Oscar. How do you think that your academical background helped you or influenced you in the way to treat this story?
Of course, studying anthropology, it makes you interested in other people, other ways of living. I think the key thing that I got out of my anthropology studies is not to judge people who might live differently to you.
That's something that, of course, we can see in the film. You talked to me a little bit about the trust between the military men and the indigenous community. But I want to ask you, how did you guys manage to portray that trust? Because
in the end, to be able to portray that, it wasn't that hard, because it wasn't an idea that we had. This was what all of the individuals on that search, they felt it in their bones. It was very real, and I think they'd all gone in. The indigenous volunteers had gone in thinking, "There's no way we want to work with the military. There's too much bad blood of decades of civil conflict. We're going to do our thing." And the military were like, "Well, we don't believe in the spirits. We believe in science and facts and one God." And so it set the stage for a potential clash. And what happened is that they both realized that they needed each other to be able to save those kids, to be able to work together and have a chance of finding them, they had to come together. And I think that's quite a beautiful story, and I hope it's something that can inspire people around the world.
Okay. In the documentary, we can also see all this, the importance of the indigenous knowledge. I mean, the Yahe, there's a shaman, there's an elf, and a lot of other things. I wanted to ask you, did your vision as a Western man and from another different culture changed when you learned about the indigenous cosmo view or worldview?
It's a great question, and the answer is enormously. I came in, I believe in science. I came in thinking, well, yes, I understand that this is what they're saying, but clearly it's not right. I think I've come out with a lot of questions. I can't explain how this happened. What I can explain is that everybody on that search went in and came out believing something supernatural happened. And the proof is that Maya Rubio, the shaman, did Yahe, and the next day, and he said the kids are alive and you're going to find them if you walk in this direction. And the next day they found the children. I can't explain that. The audience is watching our film. It is, and it's one of the sort of the mysteries of this film. And to that point, I'd like to think that the film helps show the value and wisdom of Indigenous communities and what we might be able to learn from this.
That's true. What's your favorite part about this indigenous worldview? For example, the Yahe, the shaman, the elf, their knowledges. What made it more interesting to you?
So on a really simple level, I went to the forest and I'm looking there as trees, insects, plants, physical elements. And in spending a lot of time with the Indigenous volunteers, you start to learn that they don't see it like that. They see it as a living entity with spiritual dimensions.
I have another question. I know that you made a documentary about a personal experience that, of course, it's heartbreaking for you and for your family. And it's about the documentary Evelyn. Of course, it was a tough experience to pour into the film. And what I wanted to know is how that experience with your family, that it was, I don't know if it still hurts, but of course it was a healing process making the film. How did that personal experience influence you in the making and the treatment of this story that is, of course, sensitive?
In many ways. I mean, of course, whenever grief is ongoing. So I still, if I talk to you about my brother who died, which is what that film is about, of course I feel something. I think I learned, I guess one of the key lessons I learned making that film is I was suddenly on camera. I'm behind the camera. And I got a real appreciation of how much we ask people as filmmakers to expose themselves when they talk about their lives in emotional situations. And it's changed the way that I make films. I'd like to think I'm much more gentle. If we're doing an interview, we do it more slowly. We take our time. We do lots of breaks and we stop and we check that everyone's okay. And if people are getting exhausted because we're dealing with very difficult subject matter, we stop and we come back to it later. So I guess it's slowed down filmmaking a little bit for me.
Okay, that's a key lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, at the end we can see Leslie's testimony, we can see her drawings, and what I wanted to know is why using that resource? I mean, her drawings with, of course, a little bit of animation, and she's telling the story in her own language. Why the drawings?
So one of the challenges making this film has been about how to represent the children's experience, because in the end they're the real heroes of this story. Their bravery, their intelligence is what kept them alive for 40 days. So we always knew we wanted to represent that story, but we knew that their well-being was paramount. And we began, when we started making this film, we had a number of conversations with ICBF about how we could go about sharing the children's experience. Alongside that, we got independent advice from child psychologists about what could be the dangers of interviewing those children. And their advice was that we're still very soon after a deeply traumatic experience for those children, and interviewing them on camera, for instance, could re-traumatize them. And so we made a conscious choice to not interview those children on camera. And what we did instead is Leslie gave a testimony to an investigation into the air accident and we used elements from that, her account of how she survived, to tell her story in our film. ICBF had also released some drawings of Leslie and Seleni's.
And that's, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Psychology, it works. I mean, it was a traumatic event, and she could pour all that she felt into the drawings. I mean, the colors, the way she draw. I mean, the strength, all of things.
Exactly. So we knew that we wanted to use drawings and animation to represent her story. We felt we could never do justice to the complexity of her experience in some form of reconstruction, but drawings felt it might be able to bring it to life in a way, in a childlike way, in a way that her and her siblings had experienced it.
Okay, that's true. Well, you're an Oscar winner for The White Helmets, which is a great film. I also saw it, and it's a great film, and it's very touching because it shows you another part of the reality that most of us don't see or don't know, or the media doesn't show. What I wanted to know is, how do you handle the responsibility of telling stories that are so emotional and very sensitive for the public?
It is a big responsibility representing anything that's sensitive, that's political, that's complicated. For me, one of the key things is going in knowing at the beginning that you don't have all the answers, and it's about surrounding yourself with people that do. And I was blessed on this project right at the beginning to partner with Jorge Duran and Lali Houghton, my co-directors, who had a lot of knowledge about the situation in Colombia and the local realities and local politics, and working together. That is how I believe we've crafted the film that hopefully is sensitive and based in realities and has solid journalism behind it.
Okay, talking about these sensitive topics, what differences or what similarities do you find when approaching to these traumatic events in different contexts?
So, I'm not drawn to. I know if you look at the films I've made, it looks like they're all about really traumatic events. I mean, in some ways, they are. But actually, what always draws me to the story is about people who are selfless, people who are willing to risk their lives for, I don't know, something bigger than themselves. They're the things that draw me in, and they inspire me. And I guess I'm interested in telling stories about the better attributes of human beings. You turn on the news and you can watch all the terrible things humans do to each other around the world all the time. That's a constant. But I'd rather share stories about the brilliance of people. And especially in this example, in the UK, where I'm from, Colombia is often represented in a really negative way. We get stories about conflict and the drugs trade, and Colombia is an incredibly rich, amazing country. There's so much more than that. And here is a story that can inspire everyone around the world of people coming together.
Okay, and it's special because we have 4 kids. There was even a baby of 11 months. How that touched you, or how do you feel when dealing with the kids?
I have a 6-year-old son. I remember early on in this process thinking about him and how he would be able to survive in a forest, and thinking it would be impossible. It's so. I mean, we spent time in the Amazon filming, and I remember on the very first day we got out of the plane, and the pilot waved at us and said, "I'll be back in 7 days to pick you up." And within 1 hour, our sound operator had heat stroke. It's so hard and difficult, and how those kids work together, it's stunning. And I think there'll be lessons to learn for survival going forwards from what they did in their experience.
Okay, there's a lot to learn from them too.
A lot to learn from them.
Okay. There is also another question about Wilson, the dog, because it caused a great rip. In the Colombian society, we were all like, what happened to Wilson? Are you not going to looking for him anymore? And at the end, they decided to stop the research. But I feel, personally, like in the documentary, we cannot see that with details. It's a little bit superficial, the treatment of this topic. Why was that?
There were so many elements to this story that were important. Wilson was one of them, but there was a lot. In the end, you only have a certain amount of time to tell these stories, And so while we tackle, Wilson's in the film and we do, that storyline is present, we don't dive in enormously into it. It's also, there's very little material. There was like 2 clips of Wilson that we could use. So again, it limited us in terms of how much detail we could focus on. And it's very sad that Wilson wasn't found.
Okay, but would you like to, maybe you could go back in time to include a little bit more of things of Wilson? Or do you think it was perfect that way?
In an ideal world, I'd have loved to have covered Wilson in a lot more depth, along with lots of other things in this story. But you make choices, and you have time commitments, and there's only a certain amount you can fit in every film.
Well, that's true. What's the message that you wanna that people take to their homes after they watch this documentary? What's the message you want to leave them in their hearts?
I think I guess there'd be a few. If I could, there's not just one. I would say I think this is a lesson in when we all work together, no matter how difficult the divisions that push us apart, we can achieve extraordinary things. I think this story shows that, and that's a very inspiring message in a world which is so divided. I'd like to think the film highlights the value of Indigenous knowledge, and I think that there's a lot we can learn from Witoto and other Indigenous communities around the world. And finally, I'd like to think the film shows that the Amazon, the forest, is still so full of mysteries and things we don't understand, and therefore it's paramount that we protect places like this.
Okay, that's very great lessons. Finally, we can tell people that this documentary is going to be available on November 14th.
You can watch the film on Netflix on November the 14th, and I hope your audience enjoys it.